Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments on whatever platform you happen to be watching on, assuming that you're watching live. And for the most part, they'll appear here in my chat room. I've noticed that occasionally comments don't appear. I don't understand why. But you can see the comments that appear. They'll show up here on my screen. Um, and we'll talk to anyone who wants to say hello. And today is our weekly roundup day. We're going to talk about a couple of interesting stories from the week. Last night, I was a guest on Tarot Thursdays on Divination TV. Reverend Mary, who is the host of Tarot Thursdays, is on her way to the Pagan Unity Festival. So Reverend Brian and I took the show last night. It was a lovely time. And hello to Janet in the chat room. It's good to see you, Janet. And it's interesting. I noticed as I was going through the hour that the thing that Tarot Thursday reminds me of is being the period when I was much younger in my psychic work and would sit around doing practice readings with friends. It has some of that feeling about it. Just doing quick readings um, of the kind that you might do when you're training to improve your skill, and it's enjoyable. Um, it's been a long time since I regularly engaged in something like this. Um, Hello to Antonio in the chat room. It's good to see you, Antonio. For a number of years, I really only did psychic reading at charitable events of different kinds. And it's interesting to be back into it. And if you're interested in a psychic reading, I am available. You can book a psychic reading with me at CorellianPublishing.com, or you can instant message me on Facebook or email me at donlewishp@aol.com and we could set something up. Or if you're in the Danville area every Saturday, I read at Earth Spirit Emporium, and I'll be there tomorrow. Now, today we want to talk about stories from the week. And obviously, the main story from the week was the eclipse. And I started the week by talking about the ritual that we were doing for the eclipse, that I was doing for the eclipse. And many other pagan groups were doing rituals for the eclipse as well. Many individual pagans were doing private rituals. Um, and it was, I think, for us, a major spiritual event, certainly from a Corellian point of view. Um, um, and I thought it was a lovely ritual. We went down to the Vermilion River, and a number of people joined us online for the ritual. And we had 98% totality here in Danville. So I actually had a good view of the eclipse with my silly little eclipse glasses that I think we even got a photograph with, and certainly appeared in the video. And it was quite spectacular. It was lovely to see it. I've lived through a number of eclipses. I've talked about previous magical work we've done with eclipses. Um, but I would say in some ways this was the most memorable one for me, partly because I had the best view of it that I think I've had. Many previous eclipses have not been anywhere near totality where I was. Of course, I've been in various different places over the years. So it was quite nice to get to see this, and different people had different takes on the eclipse. In the magical world, some people view the eclipse more in terms of the significance of the disappearance of the sun's light and more in terms of the significance of its return. Um, we used a little bit of both of that. We did a little releasing for the disappearance of the light, and then our manifestation for its return, the things we want to see reborn and rejuvenated in our lives. But some people perceive the eclipse as a more problematic energy, which in some ways is arguably more traditional, um, but not necessarily any better. It's a matter of how you're approaching it, what you're taking away from it. And this is true in so many things in life. The eclipse is both the disappearance and the reappearance of the sun's energy. Therefore, it is possible to view it from several different points of view. And my point of view, as we talked about, is that this is that chaos moment when old patterns are broken and new patterns can be set. And therefore, a very excellent time for magic of all sorts, especially in this case, rebirth and renewal. Now, outside of our community, there were some really interesting ideas about the eclipse. I'm not quite sure what else to call them. A large number of Christians seem to have felt that this was the sign of the rapture. Um, Made a huge deal out of it for a few days beforehand, and apparently, um, in some cases, a bigger deal than others. And I don't know. Is this the 30th rapture I've lived through? Um, they seem to happen pretty much every day. I understand the next one is going to be April 23rd. Um, I really, really kind of wish I'd been collecting "I survived the rapture" stamps for every one of them. I'd have quite a book full. But there were a lot of people who apparently thought that that's exactly what was going to happen. And the idea of the rapture is that all the good Christians disappear and are bodily assumed into the heavens on that day. I remember in 2011 or 2012, there was a rapture. And a lot of people took empty sets of clothes and laid them out and took photos and to document that, yes, this actually happened. I was kind of hoping that we would stand behind the idea when the next one came out of saying, no, no, this already happened. We have photos. We can prove it. You just weren't taken. But no, they just keep doing it. Um, it's interesting to see that no matter how many times this fails, it doesn't stop them from doing it again. And it is an example of the strength of delusion when you see it wasn't true, but you still hold on to it. And when we talk about things like Christian nationalism, Christian dominionism, this is the strength of their delusion. It certainly does not take into account reality. And like I say, this is maybe the 30th time they've made this same prediction and had it fail. Um, but they're so determined that the prediction must be true, they just change the details and make it again. Um, I will say I've known a number of people who came to the pagan path after experiencing one of these failed second comings and did realize that they were dealing with a delusion. But it seems that for most of them, the delusion somehow still holds. Um, Personally, if I'm dealing with something that's represented as a prophecy and it comes and does not happen, then I usually assume it was not an accurate prophecy, unless there's some accentuating detail that changes the case somehow. Um, I am a believer in oracles and spirit communications and prophecies, um, but I also believe that they don't always fire correctly. Sometimes we misinterpret them. Sometimes they weren't legitimate in the first place. I've seen a lot of oracles that played out exactly as they were described, and others that did not, depending in part on where they came from. But when you're on your 30th one in the matter of just a couple of decades, you'd think it would occur to you that this isn't happening. You would think that you would look at the actual wording of the prophecy, which at this point cannot be fulfilled. The details of um, the prophecies regarding the second coming of Jesus are already past. You have to really twist it to make it in any way relevant to the future, because not only is it really only relevant to the past. It's hundreds of years in the past, and impossible to be fulfilled at this point unless you really alter it. But they keep altering it and keep finding new ways to do it. So on the 23rd, we'll watch them again and see probably the same things happen. Now, there's another little news story connected to this. Um, Apparently, there was a televangelist, and I don't have the information right in front of me in terms of where this person was, but they took an interesting advantage of this situation. They convinced members of their congregation, as a sign of faith, to sign over their money and property to the televangelist prior to the rapture. And after the rapture, the televangelist was gone with the money and the property. Um, I believe this is a true story. Let me see if I can find more specific details. But it's possible, I suppose, that it might just be a cautionary tale. But I've heard of things like this happening before, and this is a very interesting thing to look at. Um, it's often a joke when people talk about this idea of rapture. That, well, if you're planning to be raptured, you don't need your property anymore. But in this case, the person accepted the property and disappeared. And so, to me, the question then becomes, well, did they do anything wrong? I don't know that I think that they did. It was all consensual. The only thing that would make it wrong on their part, if would be if they had convinced these people alone that this was something that was going to happen. But large numbers of evangelists were saying the same thing. So, I don't know. I kind of think that in that state, if you had done such a thing, you'd deserve what you got. Um, it is, but it does speak to how potentially harmful this whole rapture idea can be to people, not to mention the eventual psychological damage of realizing that this wasn't really a thing ever. Um, it wasn't a thing on April 10th. It's not going to be a thing on April 23rd. It's not going to be a thing 2 years from now. It's not going to be a thing 100 years from now, just as it wasn't a thing 200 years ago. There are entire churches that were founded on failed second comings. Um, I think the Seventh Day Adventists is one of those. That the founding of their church was partly an explanation for why their prophecy of the second coming did not succeed. Um, and how you can continue to follow something that fails so many times surprises me. Um, in addition to that, around the eclipse were a lot of other bizarre conspiracy theories. There was a conspiracy theory that it was going to cause a massive, quote, human sacrifice event, end quote, which was actually to be in the form of an earthquake. And I find that a bit of a large um, a large definition of human sacrifice. But I guess the idea was that it was somehow being intentionally provoked using technology. And it had to do with where the path of this eclipse overlapped the path of the last eclipse. And of course, was utter nonsense. No such thing occurred. Although it is interesting, there was a small earthquake around that time, but not anywhere near that location. And there are earthquakes all the time. But the predicted one certainly didn't happen. There was no major loss of life anywhere. Nobody floating into heaven. Nobody being swallowed up by the earth. Nothing. Um, I think if I remember correctly, it was right at this time that everyone's favorite politician, Marjorie Taylor Greene, made a statement about God is giving America important signs to repent. Well, on this occasion, the only sign was failed prophecies. And maybe it is a sign for certain people to repent of foolishly believing in failed prophecies, and to use a little critical thinking skills in what they do believe. Now, I'm about as woo woo as you can get, to use a certain phrase. I believe in psychism. I believe in magic. I believe in all these things. I believe in most spiritual phenomena, albeit not in the oogie boogie sort of way. But I still consider myself a person who uses critical thinking skills. My belief is based in part on my personal experiences, in part on tradition, not on blindly accepting ideas. I don't believe in blindly accepting ideas. And you'll remember, was it just yesterday, or maybe it was Tuesday, that I was talking about. I'm sitting here talking about the vortices of the earth, the chakras of the body. But I pointed out, don't just listen to what I'm saying. Go do your own research, and you're going to find that for the most part, what I'm telling you is going to be in line with what everyone else in this field is telling you. Or if it differs, I will usually explain that for certain things I'm speaking from a particular background, but you'll find that other people from that background will be saying the same thing too. Um, it's not like I went out and was suddenly struck with bizarre ideas. I've spent a lifetime studying these things, and I've tried to study them with critical thinking skills, which, if you ask me, is why I am fairly much opposed to oogie boogie psychic spiritual things. Um, I was talking about the Warrens and their work, which I consider completely objectionable, partly because there's no critical thinking involved with it. It pursues a certain agenda, and if you look into it, it's not actually there. The things that are described don't hold up to investigation. Um, with a lot of spiritual phenomena, if you do investigate them, you'll find at the very least that they hold up in the sense that people have been saying them for a long time, that people have believed them for a long time. For example, the haunting of Hampton Court Palace. Not at all a new story. Um, Occasionally new chapters, and lots of people claiming to be witnesses over a long period of time. Is it possible to explain it away? Certainly. Um, there's a famous case in Versailles where two completely credible witnesses claim to have somehow stepped through um, a wall in time and found themselves briefly in the 18th century. Um, Absolutely verifiable in terms of these two people really existed. They were really quite credible as people, and they definitely said it at the time and continued to say it throughout their lives. Can it be explained away? Well, it's been suggested that what actually happened is they ran into a group of historical reenactors, but that hasn't been documented. It's only been suggested, I believe. Um, but, a little critical thinking skill, you at least find something there. I was talking about haunted dolls the other day, and how some people think this is a very common spiritual event. But if you look historically at traditional stories of hauntings, you don't really find it. And if you look at the modern ones, they often don't really hold up very well. This is what I mean by using critical thinking skills. You actually look at what you're researching, not just accept it because someone said it. Check and see what kind of person they were. Check and see the track record of other things they said. Um, you know, some um, some paranormal researchers are far more credible than others, and some did wonderful work, and some were just there for the oogie boogie of it all. And I think this is something very important for us to look at. And coming back to the eclipse and all the weird little theories around it, had people used a little more critical thinking and looked at um, previous examples of this kind of prediction and their likelihood to work out, they would never have been worried about it. Because this is a garden variety prediction that we see all the time, all of the different bizarre theories. Um, the truth of the matter is that while an eclipse may have metaphysical aspects, it's a very easily predictable occurrence. It happens on a mathematical schedule um, when the orbits of the Earth, Sun, and Moon come into a certain alignment, and it can be very easily predicted and is. Um, if you're a believer in the effects of these things metaphysically, there are things there, but the idea that it is somehow massively disruptive to the everyday life of the Earth in mass human sacrifice events or um, so forth is certainly not borne out by previous eclipses, and no particular reason to think would be borne out by this one. Um, as something with an astrological effect, something with a metaphysical effect, that's another matter. Um, but the wild conspiracy theories usually don't hold up very well when you look at them, and certainly didn't in this case. Now, there was another story, and this all happened on April 8th, this Monday, and there was another story that happened on April 8th, which is directly related, in my opinion, and this happened in Salem, Massachusetts. And there was an explosive device thrown onto the porch of the Satanic Temple in Salem, Massachusetts in the early morning of that day. Nobody was on the property at the time, and nobody was injured, which is good. Um, but um, the FBI is involved in it. There is ongoing um, investigation. The mayor of Salem, Dominic Pangello, said, "You know, while I'm glad no one was injured in this attack, I nevertheless condemn this action in the strongest possible way. Salem is a welcoming place, and violent attacks like this are utterly reprehensible." And I completely agree. The injection of violence into this kind of religious argument um, should be concerning to all of us. We've talked, well, even in this half hour, about Christian nationalism, about Christian dominionism. The fact that they're now fairly openly turning to violence in some cases, one, is not unexpected. It's part of their pattern that is repeated historically. Um, can presumably be expected to become worse. Um, I would say there's a gigantic difference between pagans and Satanists, but they don't see it that way. And it was at Samhain that they violated a Wiccan ritual in a relatively violent manner in Salem. Um, but no one, again, was actually hurt. But now they're up to throwing explosive devices. It's only a matter of time until someone is hurt. Um, and this is not a good development, and we should be paying attention to it. What's going to happen here? Nothing's going to happen here. They're not going to find out who did it. Um, I'd be very surprised if they do. Um, to be honest, I'm not entirely convinced anyone's really looking. It is, however, something that we need to be mindful of, because while we might not see ourselves connected to the organization targeted by this bomb, um, that's not necessarily the point of view of the people who threw it. And I've talked several times since it happened about the Corellian priestess who was accused of being a Satanist um, earlier this year. And when talked about it, the relatively unimportant politician who presumably hoped to build a career out of it admitted that they knew perfectly well she wouldn't consider herself a Satanist, but they considered any non-Christian, um, any non-Judeo-Christian, to be a Satanist, and that's all they really meant by it. So this kind of brings me back to something I've said before. We don't all have the same friends, but we all have the same enemies in the metaphysical movement, and we need to be mindful of it. And, I hate to come back to that message so often, but I think it's something we're going to be brought back to, whether we like it or not, repeatedly in the next few years. Um, and I've said before that, the idea of heading this off through political action, through social action, um, I think in many ways is a window that is closed. Now it's a matter of how do we deal with it. Um, Unfortunately, we allowed extremists to become very central in this country. Having already watched it happen in the Near East, we chose not to take any actions to prevent it here. And we're in basically the same situation. We're watching, there was a story, was it just yesterday, about Arizona um, upholding a law that predates its existence as a state, and outlaws all abortion rights except, I believe, to save the life of the mother. Um, and we're seeing a lot of what had been assumed to be permanent rights just disappearing, and we'd better be paying attention because our rights could be among them. One of the responses to that ruling, I saw someone post a very interesting picture that said, you may think that the Handmaid's Tale cannot happen here, but here's a photo of women parliamentarians from Iran in the 1970s, and they had a series of women from the Iranian parliament in the 1970s, to contrast to the position of women in Iran today. And it's a major change because if you go back to the 1960s and 70s, much of the Near East was far more part of the modern secular world than it is now. They went back in time by hundreds of years in some places. And that's what Christian dominionists want in this country too. Whether you believe it or not, I'm warning you, it's what they want. We've got people who luckily still aren't completely considered credible, um, doing things you would expect to come out of the Middle Ages. I mean, the other day I think it was Roseanne Barr who was talking about um, how students should drop out of college because colleges are run by blood drinking Satanists. And anyone from my generation with any sense at all thinks that this is a ridiculous comment from a ridiculous person, but there are a large number of people who aren't looking at it that way now. Um, this is a movement back hundreds of years when you think about it, because go back to when I was young, no one could have been taken seriously making such a statement. Um, particularly aimed at a large segment of the population, because she was aiming at primarily at the Democratic Party. Um, and I'm not endorsing anything partisan. I'm saying that the woman is a fool and her statements are silly but serious. And similar statements coming from other people who are being taken seriously should be of great concern to our community. And I hate to dwell on it. Pardon me for just a moment. I guess we can say it chokes me up a little bit. But I hate to dwell on it, but I will be coming back to it many times because we cannot afford to ignore it. Um, because they will not ignore us if they truly achieve power. Um, I don't think they're quite at that point yet, but they're exerting tremendous power in this country and achieving most of their aims. And I don't see that we have any reason to think their more extreme points of view um, are not something that may become much more commonplace than they have been. Because look at all the extreme things that have become commonplace. So that's my soapbox for today. And, it's one that if we were to go back 40 years, I would never have thought I'd be talking about in these terms. Talking about it, yes. I mean, we already knew they were there, but that we would be looking at it as something this broad and this imminent a threat to our future. And are we capable of surviving it? Well, I am. Hopefully you are too. And hopefully we can do it together. Um, I don't know that I'd say that for everyone, because it's going to take determination, perseverance, and work. And um, if you're only here for fun, it's going to be a lot harder. But if you understand this is a life path that brings challenges on occasion, hopefully you're ready for it. So with that, I'm going to thank you for joining me. Um, apologize for being so heavy in my subject matter, but look at the stories. What am I going to say? And I'll be back on Monday. I hope you will join me then. And for now, let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to continue to be with us and guide us as we go forward and help us to determine what is sensible from what is foolish. Help us to use our critical thinking skills to make wise decisions in our beliefs and our lives. Help us to ignore nonsense and to seek out the truth of situations. And help us to survive those who lack critical thinking skills and pursue foolish ideas. Help us to build a strong and successful path to a good and beautiful future. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and respect. Knowing you're always with us, still from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always. And again, I'll see you on